The silence of Europe's darkest nights was never empty. Boots marched, whispers carried, and shadows fought back. Welcome to Forgotten History Tales, where I take you inside the perilous lives of resistance fighters. Stay close. Their story begins now. I take you into a night heavy with silence, a silence that is not peace, but pressure. It is 1941. Somewhere in the occupied heart of Europe. The streets are hushed, patrolled by boots that echo like hammers on stone. The air carries the smell of wet cobblestone, old smoke, and the faint tang of fear. Somewhere behind shuttered windows, families whisper, and in the cellar of a half-ruined house, a group of men and women crouch over a single lantern. Its glow is small, its flame shivering, but it is enough to illuminate maps, scraps of paper, and faces sharpened by hunger and determination. This is where resistance begins, not with trumpets or banners, but with whispers in the dark. The German war machine appears unshakable. France has fallen. Poland lies crushed. The Low Countries are under the weight of occupation. The swastika flaps over city halls where only yesterday local flags waved proudly. The world trembles at Hitler's advance, and yet, here in this forgotten cellar, a different story flickers alive. It begins with the simple act of saying no, a refusal to bend the soul, even when the body must bow. I feel the weight of that word in the air. It lingers between clenched teeth and lowered eyes. Resistance is born not from victory, but from defiance. I hear the scratching of pencils, hurried notes passed hand to hand. Code words are written, aliases chosen. A farmer becomes the Owl. A schoolteacher calls herself Lucy. A postal clerk adopts the name Jean Legrand. In the underground, one abandons the comfort of names, of past lives, and becomes part of a web woven across Europe. Fragile, invisible, and yet stronger than steel. Each alias is a mask, but behind each mask is a heartbeat, fast and fearful. To live in the resistance is to live with two shadows, the one you cast on the ground and the one of suspicion that follows you everywhere. I guide you deeper into the room. The maps on the table are worn thin, smudged with fingerprints. Lines drawn in red pencil snake across train tracks and river crossings. These lines are not random. They are lifelines. They mark supply routes, safe houses, places where parachutes may fall from the night sky carrying food, medicine, or men. Above ground, the city seems conquered. Below ground, the veins of defiance spread like roots, hidden but alive. I feel the pulse of it in the hush of their voices. Each word exchanged here is an oath, each glance a pledge of secrecy. The atmosphere outside mirrors their tension. Posters peel from walls, proclamations from German authorities demanding obedience, threatening death for sabotage, declaring curfews. The penalty for disobedience is clear: execution. Yet every morning, those posters are defaced, painted over, mocked with chalk drawings of crossed swastikas. Small acts perhaps, but each one chips at the illusion of absolute power. I imagine the moment a young boy sneaks through an alley to scrawl defiance on a wall, his hands trembling, heart pounding. He knows one wrong step means arrest, yet he cannot remain silent. It is in these gestures, fragile and fleeting, that the resistance breathes. I take you across Europe now, through occupied lands. In France, resistance cells form in cities and in mountain villages. In Poland, underground presses hum quietly, spilling out leaflets and clandestine newspapers. In the Netherlands, families hide the hunted, their basements becoming sanctuaries. In Yugoslavia and Greece, guerrilla fighters vanish into forests and hills, striking and retreating like ghosts. Each country, each village, each soul contributes differently. Some fight with guns, others with ink, others with silence and shelter. Resistance wears many faces. The danger, however, is constant. Informers walk among them. Neighbors, co-workers, even family members turned by fear or profit. A careless word, a glance too long, and lives unravel. I feel the paranoia that seeps into the marrow of every resistor. When a knock sounds at the door, is it a comrade or the Gestapo? Every meeting carries the weight of betrayal, and yet they meet. Every leaflet carries the risk of arrest, and yet they print. Fear becomes their constant companion, but it does not paralyze. It sharpens. I take you back to that cellar where the lantern flickers low. A young woman reads aloud a coded message smuggled in from London. Supplies will arrive soon, dropped under cover of night. Eyes brighten in the half-dark, though no one smiles. Hope must be tempered with caution. For every successful drop, there are failures, ambushes, losses. Still, the message is enough to keep them moving, enough to remind them they are not alone. The resistance is not a single flame, but 1,000 sparks scattered across Europe, each one fragile, each one burning against the vast darkness of occupation. What drives them? I feel it as I stand in the shadows of that room. It is not just hatred of the occupier, though hatred simmers. It is love of home, of language, of freedom. Love of a world where children need not whisper, where windows need not stay shuttered. Resistance is not only born of rage, but of memory. The memory of life before the boots marched in, and the stubborn belief that such life can return. It is this that hardens their will more than any weapon. I step back into the night outside the cellar. The city seems asleep, but it is a restless sleep. A curfew bell tolls in the distance. Patrols move with rigid rhythm. And yet, beneath the cobblestones, beneath the weight of occupation, something stirs. The resistance is not yet a roar. It is a murmur, a shiver, a rumor carried on the breath of the oppressed. But it is growing. The occupiers do not yet know it, but Europe itself is beginning to breathe again. The lantern in the cellar gutters and goes out. Darkness returns, heavy and complete. But I know what lingers there in the dark. The memory of faces lit by courage, the echo of oaths unspoken aloud. This is how resistance begins. Life in the shadows, fragile and fierce, waiting for the moment to strike. And as the night deepens, a question hangs heavy in the air. When the occupiers strike back with fire and iron, will these whispers survive or be silenced forever? I take you into the fragile rhythm of occupied life, where resistance is not only sabotage and battle, but the quiet courage of waking each morning and daring to continue. Imagine a baker in a small French town, his shopfront plain, his gestures routine. To the Germans who pass by, he is nothing more than a man kneading dough. But within his loaves, tucked between layers of flour and crust, are slips of paper, messages written in tiny code, instructions for the next rendezvous. The smell of bread masks the scent of rebellion. Every customer who leaves his shop might carry sustenance for the stomach or instructions that could ignite sabotage. The oven burns, the bread rises, and with it, so does the defiance of a people. I feel the double lives everywhere. A schoolteacher stands before a class, chalk squeaking on the blackboard, yet in her satchel are banned pamphlets. A postman pedals through cobblestoned streets, his satchel heavy not only with letters sanctioned by the occupier, but with hidden warnings from the underground. A farmer turns his fields as he always has, but at night his barns transform into safe houses for airmen shot down in the skies. The ordinary world and the hidden world live atop one another, layers of survival stitched into each gesture. I hear the strain in their silence. To survive, you must wear the mask of obedience, even as your heart beats in defiance. There is no glamour here. Resistance is hunger, weariness, the endless cold of hiding places. It is the sound of boots at midnight, the dread of a knock on the door. Children are hushed not to cry too loudly. Families eat thin soups and barter scraps. To harbor a fugitive is to condemn yourself and your loved ones if discovered, and yet, still, they hide them. In cellars damp with mildew, in attics stuffed with straw, in barns with doors that creak in the wind. Each hiding place becomes a sanctuary, each home a battlefield. I feel the weight of sacrifice pressing upon the smallest of lives. Sabotage grows like a thorn under the occupier's boot. Train tracks are loosened in the dead of night. Telephone wires are cut, leaving silence where commands once traveled. Factories, pressed into service for the German war machine, find their machines mysteriously jammed, their output slowed by unseen hands. Resistance is not only rifles in the woods, it is wrenches in gears, sand poured into engines, fire licking at warehouses. The occupier wakes to broken lines, delayed shipments, whispers of ghosts who strike and vanish. It is war by needle and thread, by spark and shadow. I hear the whispers of networks forming, vast webs stretching across countries. The French Maquis, ragged bands of men and women in mountain hideouts, emerging from forests like spirits. The Polish Armia Krajowa, vast and disciplined, striking at occupiers while building a hidden state within a conquered one. In the Low Countries, resistance hides Jews and hunted dissidents, moving them through a chain of safe houses toward the hope of survival. Each network knows it may be betrayed at any moment, yet it persists. I feel the pulse of trust, thin as a thread, binding them together. The price of defiance is high. Captured resistors face torture, imprisonment, and execution. The Gestapo's prisons are places of screams muffled by stone walls. Interrogations are designed to break not just bodies, but souls. Men are beaten until they cannot stand. Women endure cruelties that scar beyond flesh. Yet many hold silence until the end, their secrets dying with them. I feel their resolve like iron forged in fire. Some leave behind last words scribbled on scraps, hidden in cracks of prison walls, fragments of hope, of farewell, of courage that outlives them. And yet, even under this terror, defiance multiplies. Executions do not silence the resistance, they fuel it. When a comrade falls, another takes their place. Their deaths are not the end, but the spark of memory. Songs are sung in whispers, names carved into walls, courage passed like contraband from one heart to another. The occupiers believe fear will choke defiance, but instead, fear becomes the soil where defiance roots deeper. I take you now to the forests, where partisans live outside the boundaries of ordinary life. Ragged, often starving, they move like shadows beneath the trees. Their weapons are stolen, their supplies meager, but their spirit fierce. They strike railways, ambush convoys, and vanish into the green gloom. Around campfires they share crusts of bread and stories of home, their laughter rare but real. In these woods, freedom still breathes, the smell of pine, the crackle of branches, the wide star-pierced sky, all remind them of the world they are fighting to reclaim. I feel their solitude, their hunger, but also their fierce pride. Here, at least, no swastika flies. In cities, resistance is subtler but no less brave. Young women cycle through streets, baskets filled with groceries concealing revolvers or radios. Men in cafes talk loudly of nothing, while beneath the table, messages slide from hand to hand. The press becomes a weapon. Illegal newspapers printed in basements and attics, pages damp with ink. These papers tell truths the occupiers suppress, of Allied victories, of atrocities committed, of the survival of spirit. To read them is to breathe freer air. To distribute them is to risk death. And yet, still, they are printed, passed from hand to trembling hand, each copy a spark of truth in a world of lies. Everyday resistance also lives in refusal. To speak German when ordered, to salute the flag of the Reich, to hand over the hunted. Some say no and pay dearly, others say no in ways too small for punishment to grasp. These small refusals add up, like grains of sand wearing down a mountain. I hear it in the stubborn silence of a farmer, in the defiant gaze of a shopkeeper, in the quiet insistence of a mother teaching her child her native tongue, even when forbidden. These are not battles won with bullets, but with memory and will. As weeks bleed into years, the weight of living in two worlds grows unbearable. Many resistors break. Some betray under torture, some vanish into fear, yet others remain, hardened by loss, sharpened by grief. I feel the psychological toll, the gnawing anxiety, the insomnia of listening for boots at night. Resistance is as much a battle of minds as of weapons. To endure is victory. To keep hope alive is war. And still, I sense something stirring on the horizon. News travels slowly, whispered from radios hidden in barns and cellars. The Allies are striking back. Battles rage in Africa. Bombers cross the skies. Hope begins to breathe louder, mingling with dread. The resistance waits, always waiting, for the moment when their whispers can become open war. The lanterns of Section 1 are now many. They flicker in towns, in forests, in attics, in fields. 1,000 shadows move, carrying Europe's fragile heartbeat of defiance. But soon the occupiers will turn harsher, sensing this growing flame. The question sharpens. Can the resistance hold together when the full weight of Nazi reprisal crashes down upon them? I take you into a village at dawn, where the sound of birds is shattered by the roar of engines and the crunch of boots. German trucks roll into the square, their soldiers spilling out with rifles raised. The people watch from behind shuttered windows, breaths held. The night before, the resistance had struck. A railway sabotaged, a German convoy ambushed. The response is swift and merciless. Men are dragged from their homes. Women cry out. Children cling to skirts. The occupiers' law is simple. For every German killed, dozens of locals will pay. I feel the dread seep into the soil, into the very air. Resistance breeds hope, but also retribution. This is the rhythm of occupied Europe. One act of defiance, one blow against the occupier, followed by a hammer that falls indiscriminately. Villages burned, hostages executed, entire communities punished for crimes they did not commit. Yet the resistance continues. Why? Because even as fire consumes the roofs of their homes, the will to endure burns hotter. The occupiers believe fear will extinguish rebellion, but fear only hardens it. Each reprisal becomes a scar, a wound that deepens the resolve to resist. I hear the echoes of betrayal in these years. Informants walk among the resistance, their faces familiar, their smiles practiced. One careless word, one gesture of trust misplaced, and cells are destroyed. A single betrayal can unravel dozens of lives. Gestapo officers thrive on this, spreading networks of spies, dangling promises of money or safety. Yet even in betrayal, the resistance adapts. They change codes, change meeting places, cut ties swiftly. Paranoia becomes survival. No one is trusted fully, not even old friends. In this shadowed world, trust is a weapon as dangerous as any gun. The reprisals grow more brutal as the war deepens. In France, whole towns such as Oradour-sur-Glane are massacred, their people shot, their buildings set aflame. In Eastern Europe, villages are erased from maps, their ashes scattered. The occupiers call it order, the survivors call it terror. And yet, even in the ruins, whispers remain. I feel them, defiance carried in hushed voices, in scraps of song, in stories passed from parent to child. The occupier can destroy bodies, but not the memory of freedom. I take you into the prison cells of the Gestapo, where resistance fighters endure interrogations that stretch beyond imagination. In these stone chambers, the air is thick with sweat and blood. Whips crack, boots strike, water is withheld. Men are broken until they can no longer stand. Women endure tortures designed not only to wound, but to humiliate. The goal is to fracture the soul, to extract names, locations, secrets. Many perish here, yet some do not speak. Their silence is heavier than iron, their courage a weapon sharper than any blade. I hear their unbroken voices even in silence, an echo of refusal that the torturers cannot erase. The occupiers broadcast their reprisals loudly. Posters plastered on walls announce executions of resistors, their names listed in black ink for all to see. The goal is intimidation, but each name becomes legend. Each death is remembered, whispered in streets, carved into hearts. Martyrdom becomes fuel. For every leader shot, another rises. For every cell destroyed, another forms in the shadows. Repression feeds the resistance it seeks to kill. I take you into the forests of Eastern Europe, where partisans grow bolder. German supply convoys are attacked, railways destroyed with increasing frequency. Retaliation is brutal, but the partisans persist, vanishing into the vast wilderness. In the Balkans, Tito's Yugoslav partisans grow into an army, defying the occupiers in open battle. In Greece, bands of fighters retreat into the mountains, their ragged groups evolving into formidable forces. The forest becomes fortress, the mountain a sanctuary. I feel the pulse of nature itself as an ally, sheltering those who fight in its shadows. The resistance also learns to adapt psychologically. Fear cannot be eliminated, but it can be mastered. Fighters steel themselves by ritual, songs sung quietly, prayers whispered, cigarettes passed hand to hand before missions. Each gesture becomes a shield. The knowledge of death is constant, but so too is the knowledge that they fight for something greater than themselves. I sense the transformation of ordinary people into figures of myth. Farmers, teachers, postmen. They become symbols. Their faces may never be seen beyond their villages, but their courage radiates outward, rippling like water across occupied lands. And yet, I cannot ignore the toll. Families torn apart, children orphaned, entire generations scarred. The weight of reprisal presses down relentlessly. Some resistors question themselves. Is the price too high? Is the blood of innocents worth the strike against the occupier? These questions haunt them, shadows within shadows. Yet the answer, for most, is the same. Silence would cost more. To do nothing is to surrender completely. I feel the torment of this choice, the unbearable calculus of resistance. It is not glory. It is anguish, endured in the name of freedom. The reprisals deepen the secrecy of the underground. Codes grow more complex, meetings shorter, disguises sharper. Messages are hidden in seams of clothing, in the bindings of books, in the hollow stems of pens. Radios become lifelines, but also traps. Operators know they have minutes, sometimes only seconds, before German detection units triangulate their signals. Each broadcast is a race against time. The crackle of static, the rush of words in code, the click of a switch, then silence, followed by hurried flight. I hear the pounding of boots on wooden stairs, the slam of doors as radios are hidden in false walls, the pounding of hearts as operators vanish into alleys. The occupiers grow harsher with each passing year, sensing the underground tightening around them. Raids intensify. Torture becomes systematic. Yet the resistance survives, not because it is unbreakable, but because it is unkillable. For every life extinguished, another steps forward. For every secret uncovered, another is rewritten. Resistance is not one body, but 1,000, each scarred, each fragile, yet together enduring. It is the many-headed hydra. Strike one head, and another rises from the shadows. And still, whispers of hope spread. News from the outside world filters in. Allied victories in North Africa, the growing roar of American industry, the skies over Germany lit with Allied bombs. The occupiers begin to tremble. Their reprisals grow harsher, not from strength, but from fear. They sense the tide shifting, though they cannot yet name when or how. The resistance feels it too, in the marrow of their bones. The time of waiting in shadows will not last forever. But for now, the question remains, heavy and unresolved. When liberation finally comes, will there be enough left of Europe's villages, towns, and souls to receive it? I take you into a night field, damp with dew, where a small group of figures waits in silence. Their eyes search the heavens, their breath held in anticipation. And then, a low hum, growing louder, slicing the darkness, a plane, Allied. Its engines throb like a heartbeat against the night. A flare is lit, green against the black sky. The plane dips once in recognition, then releases its cargo. Parachutes bloom like pale flowers floating gently down, crates of weapons, radios, medical supplies, and sometimes men. The resistance runs forward, pulling them in, disappearing into the forest before the occupiers can respond. I feel the electricity of that moment. The resistance is no longer alone. The Allies have found them. This is the turning of the tide. By 1943, the war has shifted. The Wehrmacht is stretched thin, fighting in the snows of Russia, the sands of Africa, the skies above Europe. The resistance senses this weakness. Their whispers now grow louder, their strikes more daring, and crucially, they are no longer isolated. Radios crackle with coded signals from London, from Algiers, from Moscow. The underground is now linked to the great armies of liberation. Small hands meet larger fists. The shadow war becomes part of the global storm. I hear the crackle of clandestine radios, voices disguised in static. Jean has left for the wedding. To the untrained ear, meaningless chatter. To the initiated, it signals an arms drop, a sabotage mission, a new round of defiance. Each phrase is a lifeline, but the danger is immense. German detection vans prowl the streets, their antennas twitching like predators sniffing for prey. Radio operators work in bursts, 20 minutes, never more. They know that at any moment, black boots may thunder up the stairs. The resilience required is not only physical, but psychological. I feel their nerves straining, yet steady. Each key pressed is an act of defiance, a bullet of information shot across the occupied night. The Allies begin to weave the resistance into their strategy. Maps of France and Belgium, Poland and Greece are marked not only with rivers and railways, but with networks of partisans, caches of weapons, safe houses. Before D-Day, Allied commanders know they will need more than soldiers storming beaches. They will need the underground to rise. And so, men are parachuted in. Agents of Britain's SOE, America's OSS, Soviet operatives, all tasked with linking the scattered sparks of resistance into coordinated flame. Some succeed brilliantly. Others vanish, swallowed by betrayal and capture. The price of unity is blood, but the reward is power. I take you now into the forests of France, where the maquis swell in number. Once ragged bands, they now march in loose formations, rifles gleaming in moonlight. They ambush convoys, derail trains, sabotage bridges. Their ranks are swollen by deserters, escaped prisoners, and those who refuse to serve the occupiers' forced labor drafts. They are hunted, yes, but they are also feared. The occupier begins to realize the land itself is turning against them. The roads they travel, the trains they rely on, the villages they patrol, none are safe. Psychologically, the resistance feels a shift. For years they have lived in the shadows, hunted, harried, forced to whisper. Now they begin to taste possibility. Hope sharpens their courage. Missions grow riskier, sabotage more widespread. The occupier responds with fury, but fear gnaws at their confidence. I sense this reversal like a current in the air. The hunted are becoming hunters. The whisper is becoming a shout. And yet, the dangers multiply. As the resistance grows stronger, the Gestapo grows more desperate. Raids intensify. Informants are pressed harder. Betrayals sting deeper. For now, there is more to lose. Networks must balance expansion with secrecy. A single wrong step can undo years of work. The resistance learns discipline. Cells compartmentalized. Contacts limited. Codes revised constantly. It is not merely bravery that keeps them alive, but structure, cunning, and adaptability. I feel the tension of this balance. Growth against exposure, fire against suffocation. I take you into Warsaw, where resistance reaches its fiercest crescendo. In 1943, the Jewish ghetto rises against impossible odds. Armed with smuggled pistols, homemade bombs, and sheer desperation, they resist German attempts to liquidate the ghetto. For weeks, they fight, house to house, room to room, flames licking the sky. The world watches in silence, but the echo of their defiance spreads. In 1944, the city itself will rise, its resistance fighters holding out against overwhelming German force. Though crushed with brutal ferocity, these uprisings burn themselves into Europe's memory. I feel their defiance like a torch, illuminating the darkness even in defeat. In the Balkans, partisans grow into armies. Tito's Yugoslav fighters carve liberated zones from German control, their strength swelling until they are recognized by the Allies as a legitimate force of war. In Greece, resistance bands fight not only Germans, but also the hunger gnawing their bellies, their courage tested by famine as much as by battle. Across occupied lands, resistance no longer hides. It fights, openly, ferociously, even knowing reprisals will be horrific. The shadow war is becoming daylight. The skies above Europe are alive with Allied bombers, their droning engines a constant reminder that the tide has turned. The resistance learns to read them. When bombers pass overhead, it is not only destruction they carry, but opportunity. Sabotage timed with air raids becomes doubly effective. Allied pilots shot down in flames find their way to safety through underground networks. I see the hands of farmers and villagers guiding them through forests, feeding them scraps, hiding them in barns. Each rescued airman is a promise kept, a thread tying the underground to the greater war effort. But the resistance also bears wounds. Every success brings retaliation. Villages are razed, innocents executed, cities punished. The balance between hope and horror is delicate, yet the resistance holds to one truth. Liberation is coming. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. I feel the collective anticipation building, like the air before a storm. The question is not if, but when. And when it comes, will the resistance be strong enough to strike in unison? I leave you in that night field once again. Crates pulled into the shadows, parachutes buried, men melting back into the trees. Above, the sky is silent once more. But something has shifted forever. The resistance is no longer only whispers. It is connected, armed, dangerous. The occupiers do not yet realize it, but the shadows are preparing to rise, and when the storm finally breaks, Europe itself will tremble. I take you into a midnight farmhouse in Normandy, June 1944. The room smells of damp straw and kerosene. A radio crackles faintly on the table, its static broken by a sudden voice, British, clipped, deliberate. The long sobs of the violins of autumn. It sounds like poetry, but to those listening, it is thunder. The coded signal. The day they have waited for has come. Allied armies are crossing the Channel. D-Day. Liberation begins not on the beaches, but here in the quiet shadows of occupied Europe. For years, the resistance has prepared for this moment. Their sabotage plans are drawn, their targets marked, bridges to be blown, railways to be torn apart, telephone lines to be cut. Tonight, these whispered maps come alive. Men and women rise from their beds, gather weapons from barns, and scatter into the darkness. I feel the surge of adrenaline in their veins, the trembling mixture of fear and triumph. For so long they have endured in silence. Tonight, they roar. The German occupiers sense it too. Orders bark through radios. Patrols double, checkpoints multiply. But they cannot be everywhere at once. The resistance knows the land better. Every ditch, every hedgerow, every bend in the river. Farmers, woodcutters, shepherds, those dismissed as powerless, now wield the greatest weapon, knowledge of home. Against tanks and machine guns, it seems little. Yet this knowledge turns Normandy into a maze, each path a trap, each forest a cover. I feel the earth itself aiding the resistors, the soil carrying their weight, the fields swallowing their shadows. On the night before the landings, railways explode in a dozen places. German reinforcements meant for the beaches find their trains derailed, their bridges collapsed into rivers. Columns of troops march but are delayed by trees felled across roads, by convoys ambushed in narrow valleys. Resistance fighters, armed with little more than rifles and grenades, buy precious hours with their lives. In those hours, Allied soldiers storm ashore. The link between shadow and daylight becomes unbreakable. Without the resistance, the beaches might have drowned in German steel. With them, the tide begins to turn. I hear the clash of sabotage missions in vivid bursts. A team of young men sneaks onto a railway bridge with explosives hidden in satchels. Their hands shake as they set fuses, the air thick with the smell of oil and rust. A spark, a roar, and the bridge collapses in fire, echoing for miles. Another group severs telegraph poles, the wires whipping and sparking in the dark. German officers shout in frustration, their orders swallowed by silence. Across Normandy, chaos spreads, crafted not by armies but by scattered hands of defiance. The Maquis, once ragged bands, now move like armies. They attack convoys, cut down isolated patrols, seize villages for hours or days. Some wear uniforms taken from fallen enemies, others fight in rags, but all fight with the same fire. Their courage does not erase the danger. Reprisals are swift, villages burned, civilians executed. Yet the resistance presses on. They know the cost is unbearable, but the reward is freedom itself. I feel their anguish and their triumph intertwined, like smoke and flame. Allied paratroopers drop into fields, their shoots blossoming in the night. Many are scattered, lost, hunted. The resistance guides them, feeds them, shelters them, leads them back to their comrades. In barns and cottages, strangers share bread and wine before vanishing again into the fight. Each act of shelter is as brave as a bullet fired. The resistance does not merely fight with weapons. They fight with kindness, with shelter, with memory of what it means to be human when the world has gone inhuman. As dawn breaks on June 6th, the horizon roars with the sound of ships and guns. From the beaches comes thunder. From the fields comes fire. From the forests come shadows. The occupiers, who once seemed invincible, now stagger beneath blows from every side. I feel the air itself vibrate with history in the making. Europe holds its breath as the tide of liberation surges onto its shores. But victory does not come easily. Resistance fighters pay in blood. Entire villages are massacred in reprisals, their names burned into memory as scars of sacrifice. Some cells are wiped out in hours, betrayed or overwhelmed. Yet even in death, they achieve what they sought: disruption, delay, resistance. The occupier bleeds time, and time is the ally's ally. The whispering shadows now strike openly, no longer hidden, but standing in defiance, their faces revealed in firelight. Psychologically, the shift is profound. For years, fear was constant, suffocating. Now, hope breathes with ferocity. The fear does not vanish. Death is still everywhere, but it is tempered by the sight of Allied soldiers pushing inland, of tanks rumbling down French roads, of German retreat beginning. The resistance feels itself part of a greater story. No longer isolated, no longer whispers in the dark. They are voices in a chorus, their defiance harmonizing with the thunder of armies. I take you deeper into this storm. Imagine a resistance fighter crouched in a hedgerow, rifle pressed against his shoulder, watching German troops march toward the beaches. He knows he cannot stop them all, but he fires anyway, his shot cracking the silence, and in that moment, he is no longer alone. All around him, others rise, ambushes spring, grenades burst. The chaos is orchestrated by courage, not command. This is the essence of resistance. Ordinary people becoming extraordinary in extraordinary times. By nightfall, the world has changed. The beaches are held. The Allies advance. The resistance, though bloodied, stands. In towns and villages, church bells ring, some secretly, some openly, as if daring the occupiers to hear. The signal has been received. The shadow war is no longer confined to shadows. Europe begins to awaken. I feel the trembling joy, the cautious relief, the tears shed in silence. Liberation is not yet complete, but it has begun. And yet, as the Allies push inland, the question sharpens again. How much more must the resistance sacrifice before the end? For while the tide has turned, the storm is far from over. In the months ahead, betrayals, reprisals, and battles will still consume lives. The shadows will not vanish overnight. They will fight until the final shot of war. The violin strings of Section 4 have now become a crescendo, a symphony of defiance. But the music is not finished. The occupier still claws at Europe, desperate, savage. The resistance must endure until the last breath of occupation is gone. And so, I leave you on that June day, where beaches bleed, villages burn, and shadows fight alongside armies. The whisper has become a roar, but in the roar is a question. Will Europe's heart survive the storm of liberation, or be consumed in its fire? I take you into the streets of Paris, August 1944. The air smells of smoke, cordite, and dust. The city is restless, trembling on the edge of something vast. German patrols still march along the boulevards, but their step is uncertain, their eyes restless. Graffiti stains the walls. Vive la résistance. The tricolor flag, long hidden, begins to appear in windows, cautious but defiant. Then, as church bells toll across the city, the uprising begins. Barricades rise. Cobblestones are pried loose. Streetcars are overturned. The whisper that lived in shadows for years bursts into the open roar of rebellion. Paris is not alone. Across Europe, in Warsaw, in Prague, in Athens, in Brussels, the underground comes surging into daylight. For years, they fought in silence, cloaked in fear. Now, with Allied armies advancing, they fight openly, seizing cities with bare hands and borrowed guns. I hear the rattle of machine guns echoing through narrow streets, the crack of rifles fired from attic windows, the thunder of tanks answered by homemade bombs. The cities themselves become battlefields. The smell of bread and wine is replaced by cordite and smoke. I feel the weight of transformation, ordinary streets becoming arenas of myth. In Warsaw, the uprising is fierce, desperate, and tragic. In August 1944, the Polish resistance rises against the Germans, seizing large parts of the city. For weeks they hold, their weapons scavenged, their determination unbreakable. Children act as couriers, slipping through rubble with messages and grenades. Women fight in the front lines, heal the wounded, bury the dead. But German reprisals are apocalyptic. Artillery, tanks, and bombers reduce entire districts to ruins. Tens of thousands perish. The uprising is crushed, yet the memory of it endures like fire smoldering beneath ashes. I feel the heartbreak of that city, abandoned by its allies, yet unbowed in spirit. Warsaw's defiance becomes legend, a cry of freedom echoing even in defeat. In Paris, fortune is different. As the uprising spreads, Allied forces draw near. The German commander is ordered to burn the city, to reduce it to rubble. Bridges, monuments, entire neighborhoods are rigged with explosives. Yet he hesitates, paralyzed between duty and conscience. The resistance fights street to street, their rifles scarce but their courage endless. When Allied tanks finally roll through the city, the people surge into the streets. Flags wave, tears fall, bells ring out across Paris. Liberation is not merely military. It is emotional, mythic, unforgettable. The city itself breathes again after years of suffocation. I feel the roar of that moment, like thunder rolling down the Seine. In Athens, the resistance rises as German forces withdraw, but liberation comes tangled in political conflict. Communist and nationalist factions clash even as the occupiers retreat, sowing seeds of a new struggle that will outlast the war itself. In Prague, the uprising comes too late, caught between German brutality and Soviet arrival. In Brussels, crowds flood the streets as German forces flee, their flags torn down, their symbols trampled. Each city has its own story, some triumphant, some tragic, all carved into the memory of liberation. I hear the voices of civilians who become fighters overnight. A student who once carried books now carries a rifle. A seamstress who once stitched clothes now stitches wounds in hidden cellars. An old man who once played chess in the square now stands guard at a barricade, pipe clenched in his teeth as bullets whistle past. The transformation is total. Occupation has turned the ordinary into the extraordinary. I feel the resilience of these people, hardened by years of silence, unleashed in days of fury. But liberation is never clean. As the occupiers retreat, vengeance rises. Suspected collaborators are dragged into the streets, their heads shaved, their faces marked with shame. Some are executed without trial, others paraded as symbols of betrayal. The resistance, long united by survival, begins to fracture under the weight of politics, revenge, and power. In France, rival factions jostle for influence: Gaullists, communists, anarchists, each claiming the mantle of victory. In Greece, civil war looms. The line between liberation and vengeance blurs. I feel the unease in these moments, the truth that freedom can be as dangerous as oppression if wielded without mercy. Psychologically, the shift is profound. For years, resistance fighters lived in shadows, defined by secrecy. Now, they walk openly, hailed as heroes, embraced by crowds, yet many struggle to adapt. To fight in the dark is one thing, to live in the light is another. Their hands are scarred by years of sabotage, their minds burdened by losses. Joy at liberation mingles with grief for the dead, with guilt for those betrayed, with scars that no celebration can erase. I feel their conflict, exhilaration and sorrow woven together like threads in the same cloth. The occupiers, once feared as unstoppable, now stagger. Their retreat is chaotic, desperate. In some places they fight with savage fury, determined to leave nothing but ashes behind. In others they flee, abandoning posts, burning papers, shedding uniforms. The resistance hunts them, ambushes them, drags them from hiding places. The roles are reversed. For years the occupiers stalk the shadows. Now they are the ones hunted in alleys and forests. The resistance has become the predator. Yet even in victory, questions linger. What will come after? What shape will freedom take? Some resistors long only to return to their lives, to farms and families, to classrooms and shops. Others, hardened by war, cannot return. They are no longer farmers or teachers. They are fighters, defined by conflict. The future is uncertain, but one truth remains. They have endured, and in enduring, they have changed the course of history. I leave you now in Paris, where crowds fill the streets, flags wave, and songs rise into the sky. A tank rumbles past, its crew waving, children clambering onto its sides. Couples kiss in the open, unafraid for the first time in years. The air is thick with smoke and perfume, gunpowder and joy. It is a chaos of liberation, a storm of sound and light. The occupiers are gone, but the scars remain. And as bells toll across Europe, one question lingers, haunting and unresolved. When the shadows lift, what will remain of those who lived so long within them? I take you into the twilight of war, when the thunder of German armies has quieted into retreat, and the shadows of resistance fighters begin to emerge into daylight. Cities liberated, villages freed, flags raised again over town halls. The occupiers are crumbling, their once iron grip broken. But as Europe exhales, another storm rises, one not of invasion, but of reckoning. For the shadows now carry not only defiance, but vengeance. The collaborators, the informers, the men and women who whispered secrets to the occupiers, who profited while neighbors starved, who betrayed comrades for money, for safety, for survival. As the tide turns, they are dragged from hiding places, their faces shoved into the light. Women accused of consorting with occupiers are paraded through streets, their heads shaved, their shame displayed. Men suspected of betrayal are beaten, sometimes executed without trial. Justice and revenge blur together in the fever of liberation. I feel the fury of the crowd, the long-suppressed rage boiling over, but also the unease. What is justice in a world so fractured by occupation? In France, purges sweep across towns. Some collaborators face proper courts, others mob justice. In the Netherlands, in Belgium, in Greece, the pattern repeats. Suspicions, grudges, jealousies, all find their outlet in these chaotic days. It is the price of years spent in silence, of wounds festering unseen. Resistance fighters, once forced to endure betrayal with clenched teeth, now act without restraint. And yet, not all who are punished are guilty. Some are victims of rumor, of rivalry, of accidents of survival. Liberation brings freedom, yes, but also chaos. I hear the voices of resistance leaders struggling to restore order. Charles de Gaulle in France, determined to channel fury into legitimacy, to prevent the underground from fracturing the nation. Political factions vie for dominance, each claiming the mantle of resistance. Communists, Gaullists, anarchists, all see in liberation not just freedom, but opportunity. In Greece, ideological divides spill into civil war, resistance comrades turning rifles on each other. The unity forged in shadows cannot survive unbroken in the light. I feel the fragility of victory, the cracks spreading beneath the surface of celebration. For the fighters themselves, the transition is agonizing. For years, their lives were defined by secrecy, fear, danger. Each day was lived on a knife's edge, each breath a defiance. Now, suddenly, the war is ending, and many are told to return to ordinary life. 2 farms, 2 shops, 2 classrooms. But how does one return after living so long in shadows? The adrenaline fades, and in its place comes emptiness. Some succeed, finding solace in family and routine. Others cannot. Their hands still tremble at sudden sounds. Their minds replay ambushes, betrayals, torture chambers. I feel the weight of their silence, the scars carried within, long after the flags have been raised. And yet, the myth of the resistance is already taking shape. Newspapers proclaim their heroism. Governments elevate their courage as national legend. Stories of sabotage, of daring escapes, of whispered networks become woven into the fabric of memory. Children learn their names, streets are renamed in their honor, statues are raised. The resistance becomes more than history. It becomes symbol. In reality, the underground was fragmented, fragile, often torn by politics and betrayal. But in memory, it becomes unified, shining, heroic. Nations, scarred by collaboration and compromise, cling to this myth of unity. I feel the need for it, the healing power of a story that simplifies what was unbearably complex. In Warsaw, the ruins still smoke, the uprising crushed. Yet even there, the myth grows. The fighters of the ghetto of the city are remembered not for defeat, but for courage. Their ashes become seeds of memory, sprouting into legend. In Yugoslavia, Tito's partisans, once ragged bands, now stand as a new state's foundation, their myth wielded as legitimacy. In France, the Maquis are lionized, their memory overshadowing the darker truths of collaboration. History and myth intertwine, inseparable, but memory is selective. Some stories are celebrated, others silenced. Jewish fighters, who resisted in ghettos and forests, often find their sacrifices minimized in the larger national narratives. Women who carried messages, hid fugitives, fought and died, are often pushed to the margins of memory, their contributions softened or erased. The myth of the resistance is powerful, but it is incomplete. I feel the silence around these forgotten voices, the injustice of memory as much as of history. Justice, too, struggles to find its footing. War crimes trials begin. Collaborators stand in courtrooms, their faces pale under the weight of accusation. Some are sentenced to death, others to prison, still others freed by lack of proof. The victors write justice, but justice cannot heal every wound. Families torn apart cannot be restored. Betrayals cannot be undone. The resistance, for all its heroism, carries ghosts. I feel them lingering in the air, whispering in the silence after the celebrations fade. And yet, out of this wreckage, something enduring emerges. The idea that ordinary people, armed with nothing but courage and secrecy, could defy the mightiest army in Europe. That idea becomes immortal. It shapes post-war Europe, reminding nations of their resilience, their ability to endure. Even in the Cold War years to come, when memory becomes weaponized, when myths are polished or suppressed, the core truth remains that in the darkest night, there were those who refused to bow. I leave you now in a village square, months after liberation. A resistance fighter stands at the edge of a crowd. He is no longer in rags or hiding. He wears no mask. Children play nearby. Flags ripple in the breeze. Yet his eyes are distant, haunted by shadows. He has survived, but survival is not peace. Around him voices sing, bells ring, the world moves forward. But within him, and within so many others, the war continues, silent and invisible. And as Europe rebuilds from ruins, one question lingers. Will the memory of the resistance be a balm that heals, or a myth that hides the wounds too deep to bear? I take you into silence, the kind that comes not with peace, but with aftermath. The war has ended. The guns are quiet. Europe lies scarred, its cities shattered, its villages burned, its fields filled with graves. Yet in this silence, the voices of the resistance linger. They whisper from memorials, from ruins, from photographs tucked into fading albums. They whisper from the memories of those who endured. The war is over, but the shadows of resistance remain. I walk through Paris, where boulevards now bustle with life, cafes filled once more with laughter, but beneath the cobblestones, I feel the memory of barricades, of whispered codes, of fear clutched tight in the chest. In Warsaw, I see new buildings rising over rubble, but I hear still the echoes of songs sung by fighters in sewers, their voices trembling yet unbroken. In Athens, in Brussels, in Prague, in Oslo, the pattern repeats. Life returns, but the shadows never truly leave. The resistance has become legend. Nations rebuild their identities on it. France proclaims itself a nation of resistors, its shame of collaboration pushed to the margins. Yugoslavia builds a new state from the myth of partisans. Poland, scarred and crushed, remembers defiance even in defeat. The myth comforts, binds, inspires, and yet it also obscures. For the resistance was never simple. It was fragmented, fragile, often betrayed. It was made of courage, yes, but also of fear, hunger, and compromise. Myth polishes the rough edges. History remembers the heroes. The forgotten, the betrayed, the silenced, the broken, fade into shadow once more. I feel their absence as heavy as their presence once was. For those who lived it, the legacy is personal, not mythic. A woman who carried messages on her bicycle remembers not the triumph of liberation, but the terror of checkpoints, the nights she wondered if she would see her children again. A man who sheltered fugitives recalls not glory, but the pounding on his door, the fear that froze his veins. Survivors live with scars invisible to monuments. I feel the weight of these private memories hidden beneath public celebration. They remind us that resistance was not abstract. It was flesh, bone, heartbeat, breath. And yet, out of this suffering emerges a truth. Resistance matters. Even when crushed, even when punished, even when it failed to stop massacres or defeat armies, it mattered. It preserved dignity. It preserved humanity. In a world where silence was demanded, resistance spoke. In a world where obedience was enforced, resistance said no. That no echoes across decades, It is more than history. It is inheritance. I take you into the forests once more, where partisans once hid. The trees are quiet now. Moss grows over old campsites. Rusting rifles lie buried beneath soil. Birds sing where once gunfire cracked. And yet, if you listen, you can almost hear it. The whispers, the laughter, the shuffling of boots in the night. The forest remembers. Europe remembers. The shadows linger not to haunt, but to remind. The resistance teaches us that war is not only fought by armies, by generals, by tanks and planes. It is fought by bakers smuggling notes in loaves of bread, by farmers hiding airmen in barns, by children carrying messages through alleys. It is fought by women who defy orders, by men who refuse silence, by strangers who choose compassion over fear. These acts, small and fragile, add up to defiance that no occupier can fully extinguish. I feel the power of that lesson, stretching far beyond the war itself. But the legacy is also cautionary. Resistance is never clean. It is sacrifice, betrayal, vengeance, guilt. It leaves scars on nations, on families, on souls. To remember only the myth is to forget the price. To honor the courage is right, but to forget the cost is dangerous. I feel the tension between memory and myth, between pride and pain. The shadows remind us of both. Today, monuments rise across Europe. Plaques mark sites where fighters fell, where radios crackled, where trains derailed. Eternal flames burn for the unknown resistor. School children are taught their names, their deeds, and yet, in the quiet moments, the truth is more haunting. For each hero remembered, there are dozens forgotten. For each story told, many are lost. Resistance was vast, but it was also intimate, woven into kitchens, classrooms, alleys, attics. Its legacy lives not only in monuments, but in whispers passed down through families, in photographs hidden in drawers, in scars never spoken of aloud. I feel the mythic aura of the resistance not as legend alone, but as something deeper, as proof of human defiance against the abyss. It is easy to imagine that armies alone won the war, but the resistance teaches us otherwise. It shows us that even in darkness, when the world demanded silence, ordinary people could become extraordinary. That courage can bloom in cellars, in forests, in prisons, in the very heart of despair. That even when crushed, resistance leaves seeds that grow into memory, into dignity, into freedom. And so, I leave you here, in the silence of post-war Europe, where shadows linger. The streets bustle, the forests grow, the cities rise again. Yet beneath it all is the memory of those who lived, fought, and died in the dark. They remind us that resistance is not only history, it is a question. What would you do if faced with the same night? Would you bow, or would you whisper no? That is the legacy of Europe's resistance, not only the story of what was, but the haunting challenge of what could be again. And as I step back into the quiet, I hear their voices one last time, fragile, fierce, unbroken. Whispers in the dark, whispers that became fire, whispers that became freedom.